Star Trek Discovery has just premiered, and as we know, it's set 10 years before the beginning of the original series. That means maybe some characters could be touched on or introduced, and maybe that exact character is the best character in all of Star Trek, Spock. I'm shouting. Sorry about that. So we know that this takes place 10 years before the events of the original series.
Right.
And we know that Spock was on the Enterprise pre-Kirk for 13 years. So it is possible to do a sideways leap, you know, kind of a DS9 TNG kind of thing where there's concurrent storylines going on, and take a look at Spock. And I would say most of the time, this wouldn't be a great idea. But I think Spock is such an important character to all of Star Trek that they should do this, for sure.
See, I'm of the opposite mind. I think that they should leave Spock alone. I think you can touch upon that he was, you know, that the character here was with Spock, that she grew up with Spock, but you don't have to. I don't think you need to bring him into everything Star Trek, because I think then fans are going to start expecting these cameos, expecting these throwbacks, and I think that you're taking away from a show that just started from its potential identity.
Here's my argument why. So they have an inextricable history together, which is I guess now being written. But we've done this before in Star Trek where, you know, perhaps Spock knew something and didn't mention it for a long time. He's very good at keeping secrets. And it does look like she's the ward of Sarek and I guess Amanda.
Yeah, that's what they're saying right now, yes.
We haven't seen Amanda introduced at all.
Right.
So she's somewhat of a little sister maybe, or perhaps, you know, he was already off in academy. I'm not exactly sure how old she is in the show. I have an idea of how old Spock is though, which is he's on the younger side of young adult. But he's definitely also in the Federation at this point, working as she is. So Sonequa Martin Green has talked about trying to flesh out this history a little bit because we want it all to make sense. And you know, there's holograms and things that weren't in the original series in this, but I chalk it up to I want to watch a show that is using its technical ability and is not at pre-1960s levels at this point. And I'm just going to hold that suspension of disbelief. But she herself has spoken about what they could possibly do. There is certainly room for that. I can be brutally honest and say I think it is quite genius the way they have weaved me into that story, and it is something that seems very normal when you see it. It makes so much sense. It's not what you'd expect, but it does make sense. But then I'll also quote our executive producer, Alex Kurtzman, because he touched on it at San Diego Comic-Con. They said, how is this going to happen? We've never heard of this woman before. And he said, I'll just say to you that we're working on it. Be patient with us, we get it, we're working on it. She goes on to talk about, as I mentioned, the family dynamic a little bit. Maybe we'll learn more as the series progresses. My parents were killed, and I was taken into the Sarek and Amanda household as a result of it. Amanda affected me quite a bit because here we're talking about the person who's taken out of the culture they were born in and placed into a different culture altogether. So it's culture shock, to say the least. So what was interesting about my upbringing with the two of them was that I was indoctrinated with the Vulcan way of life. I was on Vulcan, and I was raised to be that. And so there was always the fight to deny my humanity and take on the sort of Vulcan spirit. But while that was happening, here's Amanda, human Amanda. So here we have this household of the Vulcan patriarch, the human matriarch, this half Vulcan, half human boy, and this human girl. So I think that's something interesting that I haven't really thought of yet as I've watched the premieres, episodes 1 and 2. I think Spock is an easy choice to make though because of how his importance. I mean, I know this isn't tied to the Kelvin universe, which is where the movies are.
Yeah, something completely different.
But Zachary Quinto is the current Spock. And it would be, you know, these are what, alternate universes? Parallel universes? It wouldn't, he would probably look the same. Even if we're in the prime timeline, or well, we can't do old Spock anymore. It's not possible.
No.
And I wouldn't want them to be honest. And I think it could work though. I think he's a really interesting character in that he's kind of a thinking man's hero. And he's, I think, probably the greatest creation Star Trek has made. You could definitely argue with me on that. It's okay. And I think his inclusion would work continuity-wise, and I think it would only help the show. Though you do make a good point in saying it needs to find its own footing.
It needs to find its own footing. To bring Spock in, especially relatively early, they're still experimenting with this whole CBS All Access thing, not having it directly on TV. I think they need this show to stand on its own merits and not just try and cram in characters from the previous series. And I think that, I mean, yes, Spock is Spock. Yeah, I know, but Spock is such a beloved character. I mean, and he does work so well because he was Kirk's foil. As much as any antagonist that Kirk went up against, whether it was Khan or whoever, Spock was as much Kirk's foil as anybody else in the series was, because he was his exact opposite. He wasn't as impulsive. He wasn't as I view him as kind of the personification of Star Trek, which is passion versus logic, though he does lean much heavier on the logic side. Well, yeah, and the reliance on science and technology, and the want to learn more. I mean, that's what Star Trek has always been about. Is about trying, going to where no man has gone before, and really just exploring and interacting with new worlds and new species. And I think Spock, like you said, is kind of the embodiment of that. But I think cramming him into this series, especially this early on, I think would just complicate things. And then if you do it once, then there's going to be pressure to do it again and again, and then possibly with other characters. And I think it just waters down the potential of what Discovery could actually be. I think he'd be a great addition to season 2. And I think he could help in a secret mission with the Klingons, but that's my opinion. Audience, would you like to see Spock in Star Trek Discovery? I also want to remind you that I am reviewing Star Trek Discovery on the sister channel to this channel, What the Flick. Please check that out. I have extensive thoughts on CBS All Access, and please like and subscribe here for more.